Today on The Big Questions, is science undermining religion, and do our genes define us? Good morning, I'm Nicky Campbell. Welcome to The Big Questions. We are back in our Manchester studio with our socially distanced guests, and today our virtual audience is joining us via the big screen from right across the northeast of England. Two other guests are also taking part via screens. Welcome everybody, wherever you are, to The Big Questions. Today marks the end of British Science Week, a celebration of science, technology, engineering and maths. And over the last year, as the country has undergone times of uncertainty and fear, it has been science that we have relied upon to provide a solution or way out of this crisis, and fingers crossed, that's on the way. Thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, even decades ago, the faith of people across the globe would have been placed on their gods. Now, today, we can all rely on the findings of science. That doesn't mean science and faith can't coexist. After all, George Lemaitre, who developed the Big Bang Theory, was a Catholic priest. Gregor Mendel, the pioneer of modern genetics, was an Augustinian monk. Francis Collins, the leader of the Human Genome Project, found Christianity in his 20s. But in 2017, an Ipsos Mori poll questioned more than 1,000 scientists and found that 60% said they were not religious. Is science undermining religion? Welcome, everybody. Right, Christina, Dr. Christina Biggs, Christians in Science. Great. So, as a scientist, you have to answer this question because DNA and the genome understanding has advanced so rapidly in recent years. So, virgin birth, right? If Jesus were to be subject to a DNA test, 23 of his chromosomes would come from his mother and be identified as Mary's. The other 23, what would the reading tell us? Well, one of our members did a paper on this a while ago now. Fantastic. Fantastic. It's in the Science and Christian Belief published journal, peer-reviewed. I seem to remember he thought, now this obviously I think, religious people will cringe out there, quite possibly. But he said in some cases you can have what's known as a chimera. And I'm afraid I didn't read all the articles, I don't know exact biology, but within his own science, there was a possibility that basically Mary's genetic material, I don't know, I should have read the whole article, I'm really sorry. But he was a biologist and he thought there was a biological explanation for Jesus' genome. There are lots of questions like that which arise from modern science and modern scientific understanding. Yeah. So you can't, off the top of your head, no? Well, I mean, that's what makes science so interesting, stuff we don't know. And makes religion so interesting as well. And I would say, first of all, rather than looking for God in the gaps, I would say that there's some very cool science out there, which we all really enjoy. And to scientists, the more we understand that kind of cool science, the more brilliant we think God is for having thought it up. But I just wonder if that undermines the whole notion of the virgin birth. I mean, there'll be lots of debate about this on social media, as we speak, as this goes out. That doesn't undermine your belief in the virgin birth at all, whatsoever. I guess as scientists, particularly in Christians in Science, we do tend to more believe in the miracle of timing than, but we do accept that miracles can happen because if God made the whole world, then God can do anything he or she likes. Right. But the other thing we believe about God is that he made the universe as it is, which is very beautiful, consistent, reliable, so that the reliability of the world, as well as its beauty and the way that we can predict things, is actually part of God's character. So I don't think a gap is going to be where you find God. Sure. And you accept science, you accept evolution, you accept Darwin, you accept gravity, you accept all that stuff. But there are miracles. Let me put that one to you, David, before we spread it out. So Jesus is subject to a test to have a look at his chromosomes. 23 come from Mary. What's the reading in the lab of the other 23?
Well, Nicky, I'm an astrophysicist rather than a biologist, so this is way outside of my area.
What, the virgin birth?
Just affirm the sense that science has mystery to it and theology has mystery to it. And to be honest, in answer to the question on the virgin birth, I don't know. But I do think that science doesn't undermine religion, but it poses interesting questions to religion. Mm-hmm. That's always been my experience, working with the origin of the universe, or the end of the universe, or the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, which is some of my area.
Indeed.
And I think science sometimes raises questions that itself can't answer. For example, where do the laws of physics come from? Science assumes that. But also, science has often helped me to think more sensibly about how God works in the world. So at the origin of the universe, there are some who would say, well, our laws of physics break down, therefore let's push God into the gap as the explanation. But as Professor Hawking worked on and other quantum theorists are working on, it might be that we're able to fill in that gap. Now, God to me is not the explanation of a gap of ignorance. God is the one who sustains the whole universe, moment by moment, by sustaining its laws, with which we as scientists can study. And therefore, for me, science is a gift of God.
Okay, let me move on, because you've actually encapsulated in that very interesting answer and summed up the Stephen Jay Gould, great evolutionary biologist's notion of a non-overlapping magisteria of science and religion. Do you want to come in here, Helen, on this interesting point about the science that we know now being applied to things like the virgin birth?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because what has happened is that as time has gone on, science has answered questions that religion used to deal with, and it's delved further and further. And I guess in an abstract sense, in this case, we won't ever know. This is an event that is thought to have, if it happened 2,000 years ago, we don't know. However, I think that what it demonstrates is you sort of don't need to invent extra layers. Science answers a lot of questions. If someone had been there at the time with modern genetic techniques, there would have been a really interesting answer that we won't know. So I think this is exactly the kind of thing science makes scientists do, right? Is think about the world, ask questions, and maybe deal with answers they don't like. That is the scientific method. You look for the evidence, you base what you're doing on the evidence, you test your hypotheses, and you have to go along with what you find. And that's perhaps the place where science and religion differ a little bit, because after a point, perhaps religion looks for something that isn't, the scientific method doesn't give you, but they want it to be there. But science, you don't need that. You just have an answer, and you follow on with where that answer goes.
But can't religious people be inspired by science, be inspired by the cosmos? If you believe in eternity, surely you should be inspired by infinity.
Yeah, but there's no monopoly on awe that for religious people. There are far more universal things. So people look up into the sky and they see the stars, they see that they are small in comparison with the universe. And that's what awe is. They see mountains and oceans, and those are far more universal sources of awe and inspiration and interest in the world. And it seems that if you want to choose a framework like a religion that lays something on top of that, then perhaps you can. But the fundamental things that are causing awe are universal to everybody, and you do not need a religion in order to be inspired. And, as you said, most scientists are very good scientists and don't need any extra sources of inspiration. The natural world is enough.
Some of the great evolutionary biologists are Christians, not Adam, and we'll come to Adam in a second. Christina, do you want to come back on what we heard there from Helen?
Yes, it's interesting, the sense of awe. I was fascinated by Richard Dawkins' the last page of his book, The Ancestor's Tale, which is this thick, and I did read all the way through it.
Is it good?
It's brilliant. So The Ancestor's Tale basically lays out the whole history of the knowledge of evolution. And obviously Richard Dawkins didn't do all of the science himself, but it's a massive endeavour. He's taken all the people, talked to them about the different. And the point about evolution is it's got lots of gateways. There's not just one sort of evolution. You have pinch points. You've got different kinds, like sexual selection is a kind of evolution. And his last page, he looks back, and just as Helen says, he has this sense of awe. He says, "Of course, I'm amazed." And he's amazed not just how complex this thing is, but how unlikely we human beings are on a scientific level. But then he says, about 2/3 of the way down, he starts saying, well, but does this mean, what about religion? And he says, well, everyone knows I'm unreligious, and that's a pretty big understatement. But then he says what he finds about religion is it's limiting. And he has an objection to religion because it limits. And I would just disagree with that from my personal point of view. And I think if you do see religion as something that cramps and constricts, and it can be, there are lots of different sorts of religion.
Yeah.
So, of course, you've got to go for the right kind of religion, I would say.
Okay. But you're right. I mean, what he says, it sort of stymies curiosity. Stops you, just to move it on, and it's like seeking answers. To be fair, in the Quran, it said, always seek knowledge. Go and try and find stuff out. A lot of people don't follow that, Imtiaz, do they?
No, and the thing is, just like to what the professor was saying, I think one of the problems is that religions will often ask questions, but expects you to have the right answer that falls within its religion. So in Islam, sure, go and seek knowledge, but you better come back to God. And that's the problem, that it doesn't let you leave that room that it's created for you. That's not science. That's never going to be scientific. That's not the scientific method. The scientific method is, in my mind, somewhat humble. We don't know everything. And so any answer is possible, and we search and go through that. Religion doesn't allow that journey. That's my problem with religion, that stemming of thought beyond God.
And that's why you left Islam. Let's go to a couple of people in the audience who would like to say something first of all. Let's go to Susan. A quick word, Susan. Hi.
Hi. I'd just like to follow up on what Imtiaz just said. I think that's a really important point about science. It accepts its unreliability. It accepts it mayn't be right. It accepts it mayn't be infallible, but it doesn't have a fixed point. It is a journey. It's working towards the truth all the time. And as new evidence comes up, it changes what it says. That's just, I think, a real big difference between the scientific view and the faith-based view.
Christine, you want to say something? I see you're kind of shifting in your seat as if you may want to express an opinion. Hi there. What is it? What would you like to say?
Hi. I'd just like to add that for me, both sides of the coin, science and religion, both search for the truth, but in different aspects, in different ways. I mean, one looks for like height, weight, and all of the material things. But for me, religion looks for the compassionate side and the kindness and suffering, and we search for the truth just in different ways.
David, I know that you believe that hi, how you doing? You believe the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, don't you? So you believe God created the Earth. How do you align that with science?
I want to suggest that the founders of modern science believe those things, and it was a catalyst for their scientific work. So there's a good track record here. But the point I would like to make is about unbelief being a religion.
I'd like to ask you that, though. What leads you to believe, if I may, just because it's quite key when we're talking about science and religion, that you believe something that every branch of science, every strand of evidence goes against. How can you possibly, in this day and age, with all the science out there of every single scientific discipline, believe the world is less than 10,000 years old? I mean, to a lot of people watching, that's just nuts.
Science doesn't start with a blank sheet of paper. It starts with presuppositions. The world is real. The world is good. The world is rational. And all these things come from a Christian worldview. Now, this is the issue of unbelief. Unbelief starts with certain presuppositions. And so you can develop your science from a Christian perspective.
All right.
You can develop your science from an unbelieving perspective.
I understand what you're saying. Okay, listen, let me move it on. I understand what you're saying without addressing what I asked you. But what you're saying is clear, that everything has to start with the Bible, and it's that literal impression thereof. David, I mean, this is what makes a lot of people think, come on, religion. We don't even debate evolution. Does your brother in Christ's opinion there just not embarrass you slightly?
No, it doesn't, Nicky, but I have to admit the divergence of opinion and a number of Christians who do take a 6,000-year dating to the universe.
You're a scientist.
My own view is that it's 13.8 billion years, and that there is a cosmic evolution, which I'm really happy about as the process of God. But I think you're right that it's actually how you interpret texts that's key to some of the controversies within religion. And for me, the first chapter of Genesis is not a scientific textbook to be read alongside other scientific textbooks. For me, the first chapter of Genesis is actually a hymn of praise. It picks up who God is and says, let's worship him in the way that actually David talked about in terms of a God of beauty and goodness and truth. Now, I think we just have to deal with religion in that way. We have to understand that texts within religious communities are not paralleled within the scientific world in the same way. They come with a certain authority. But I think there's a way of talking about them which brings together science and theology with authenticity and integrity. But we have to pay attention to what's going on within religious communities and see the dynamics that are at work.
And take them with you. Okay.
Can I jump in there?
Yes, please.
Just
jump
because
in.
It's really interesting in those 2 points that the values, that they were talking about values, about being compassionate, about being authentic, and religion. The problem comes. Science is, a humanist point of view, if you like, is based on values like compassion. You don't need to be religious for that. However, the problem comes that when you have a religion which finds a piece of science that it doesn't like and it does things that are not compassionate because the religion is more important than whatever the science is, or being compassionate, that's where the problem comes. So I don't think anyone would disagree that being compassionate is a good thing. But if the religion, if those beliefs take it to a place which is not compassionate, actually they're moving away from those fundamental human values. And that's one of the problems of, religion in this context. Science, like, condoms and HIV and the history there, that the religion took itself away from being compassionate because the religion was more important to them than the reality shown by the science.
It's interesting because it's starting from your opinion and it's trying to find the facts and reject the facts accordingly, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is, and this is a fundamental difference between science and religion, which is why I adhere to what you mentioned at the beginning, which is the idea of non-overlapping magisteria. But it kind of is, this whole conversation is really about what we want from these different domains of how we understand the universe. And science and religion do two things. They aren't fundamentally incompatible in the sense that, in a practical sense, some scientists are religious, and we have to deal with that. But if you ask the question, what was the chromosomal haploid count for Jesus Christ? That is incompatible as a question with our understanding of the universe via science, because that thing didn't happen, unless he's a Komodo dragon, which we don't think Jesus was, because they can do parthenogenesis and can do virgin births. But the fundamental thing is that even when we talk about the virgin birth, that not only is scientifically incompatible, it's also theologically and historically inaccurate
but
as well.
God can do anything, Christina said.
Yeah, but the virgin birth wasn't even introduced into the religious doctrine until the 12th century. That is not a thing that happened.
Wow. Yeah, I'm not a biologist, so I really wish I read that paper now. But
can I put another one to you? Because can I put another one to you, which is Christopher Hitchens actually identified this. I think we now know, I think he said 100,000 years, but I think we now know that Homo sapiens emerged a little bit longer ago than that, maybe 250,000?
350.
Yeah.
350, right, from precursor species. There were quite a few species of human being around at the time.
Yeah.
So if we emerged 350 years ago, Homo sapiens, Christ came along 2,000 years ago. Why did he take his time?
I like that one. Wow. Well, first of all, we don't believe that people born before Jesus Christ go to hell. What we believe is that Jesus died to save everyone, absolutely everyone. Personally, I am of the belief of Dame Julia of Norwich that actually everyone will end up in a good place when they die.
Everyone.
Yep.
Even Adam, after what he said about the virgin birth.
Well, I think God's very forgiving.
You better be.
Yeah, so, I mean, but then, Revelation does talk about, I was just reading it last night, is that there's one bit where it says, some will awaken, will resurrected to everlasting glory, others will awaken to everlasting shame.
Mm-hmm.
So, but shame could still be in existence within heaven where you're feeling very ashamed of yourself for a while. I don't know, everlasting.
But humility, if you look at the great span of time, I'm so sorry, but this is a point which you may actually be in accord with.
Yeah.
If you look at the great span of time and the wonders of creation and the cosmos and evolution and it's the awe-inspiring magic of reality, as Richard Dawkins put it,
Yeah.
that chimes with our being humble, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Humility, the humility that the religious should have.
Well, yeah, but so do scientists. I mean, they have a lot of humility as well. But then some scientists can be very arrogant, and so can the religious people.
Well,
so
that's a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing to have that humility, to not have the arrogance and of faith.
Yeah. Well, I don't. As a person of faith, I hope I'm not arrogant.
Yeah, exactly.
But sorry, to come back to your, can I just say something about Adam and Eve and all that kind of thing?
Please.
So Jesus coming in sort of 2,000 years ago, leading up to Jesus was a whole, and I think of the whole history of Israel as a kind of logbook of humanity. It's a scientific logbook. So God appears to first, I think God appeared to Adam in much the same way as he appeared to Moses and Abraham.
So Adam was real?
Yeah, it could. I mean, Dennis Alexander will back me up on this one. So he did a book about this, actually, where he looked at the different theories of who Adam might have been. Of course, you could just have Adam as metaphorical. But what you can't really have is Adam who was however many years ago and the only person. So I would agree with Dennis that Adam and Eve might have been a real human couple, but they were Neanderthal farmers, one of a big population.
Got you.
And that's where Cain's wife would have come from. Okay.
We've got a fascinating debate to come, but that's
Yes.
an interesting point on which to leave it.
Okay.
We leave it on Adam, and we leave it on Adam.
Okay.
All right.
Cool. Nice one.
And more to come. Thank you very